Yo, welcome to Caffeinated Deep Dives. Today's episode is about Hermes and the Birkin Bag. I recorded this episode in December 2023 and just releasing them now, as you all know from the past couple months. A couple of things have happened since then that I wanted to add to this podcast, but that'll happen towards the end after the awards are given out. So the three things that happen that are noteworthy is that number one, Hermes is involved in an antitrust case, which is quite interesting and tells a lot about its business model. We'll discuss that. Number two is Jane Birkin, the namesake of the Birkin bag, passed away in July 2024. Rest in peace. And the third thing is that there is the current trade tariff war as of April 2025 and how that's affecting luxury and Hermes. So I will discuss that at the end of the awards later this episode. Hope you guys enjoy. What we do at Hermes is sell time. When I was the head of Hermes's leather department, there's a spike in the gold price in 2008 because of the uncertainty in the financial markets. We use much more gold in the closing of our bags than anyone else, and that has a cost. So the finance person said, "Do you need to put so much gold?" And I said, "Okay, let's discuss." And I called in one of Hermes's best craftsmen, and I asked, "What do you think?" The craftsman told me, "It's very easy. If I put less gold like the other brands, no craftsman will see the difference. The sales associate won't see the difference. In the window of the store, no one will see the difference, and the client will not see the difference. But in 9 years, the way Hermes does it will have such a better patina than anyone else. What is going to happen in 9 years is as important for Hermes as what is going to happen in a few months." So that is a story told by Axel Dumas, the Hermes CEO, the current Hermes CEO. He's 53 years old, sixth generation member of the Hermes Dumas family, which goes back to 1837. Well, 1801 technically. That's when Thierry Hermes, the founder of the brand, was born. But he didn't launch his official business until 1837. But the whole point is today's episode is about the Birkin bag, which is the apex of the luxury, the ultra luxury industry. You know, people have been asking, "Trung, can we get some luxury products on this podcast?" Yes, this is the first one. Actually, in my mind, the second one. The first one was the garlic naan in episode 2 from Trader Joe's. That's a luxury for me. And I guess the point of bringing that up is luxury is not purely just price, right? Luxury is many other things, as we will discuss in this episode. So Axel Dumas, the Hermes CEO, his uncle, Jean-Louis Dumas, he was kind of probably the biggest hitter in the Hermes story. He was the one responsible for creating the Birkin bag, which we will discuss. But Jean-Louis said, "Time is our greatest weapon." And the reason I bring up his quote is referencing the original story about gold is Hermes and the Birkin bag is a story about heritage, craftsmanship, and time. And all these elements we will bring together and help you explain how to create something of luxury, right? Is not necessarily that anyone can just go do it tomorrow, but understanding what makes something luxury. I think there's a million applications because there's this element of, heritage, making something timeless, making something that you can't quite put your finger on. I think in a world of increasing abundance, as we fill out more of Maslow's hierarchy, this is kind of where the battlefield of ideas and commerce will be, is how do you fulfill these other human instincts? And as we will find on this episode, luxury it's been with humanity, it has to do with social stratification, hierarchies. It's been there since the beginning. It's a very important psychological concept. Now, before we get started about the luxury industry, I just want to say that I love that original story with the gold bag because Axel's asking the finance guy, and the finance guy's like, "Yeah, we can't put too much gold in there. It's going to cost us." And the craftsman, the artisan is just like, "No, we need it. It's going to look better in 9 years. The patina is going to look better." So that's the first time I've said patina on this podcast. And I just have to say I love that story because anytime a finance bro gets owned, it's solid. Now, back to Hermes and the Birkin bag. So the Birkin bag costs about $8,500. I know this because my wife reminds me constantly that I'm sometime down the road, I'm going to end up getting her a Birkin bag. I've talked to many other husbands and wives. This seems to be like a thing. The Birkin bag has outperformed the S&P 500 since its founding in 1984, since the launch of the Birkin bag. So its annual returns about 15% for the Birkin. S&P 500 is 8%. Now, Hermes as a company does about $10 billion a year with software-like margins. So 70% gross margins, 40% operating margins. Its market cap is over $200 billion. And here's the crazy thing. This is from a Bloomberg article, okay? So since 2010, Hermes is up 10 times as a stock. Not investment advice. I'm just saying, it's up 10 times. Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, LVMH, the largest luxury conglomerate in the world, is up 6 times, okay? Now here's where it gets interesting. Hermes's market cap is about 60% of LVMH's, but it only does a seventh of the revenue. So 1/2 the market cap at 1/7 the revenue. And what that should tell anyone that is in investing, finance, or just using pure logic, something about the Hermes brand makes it more valuable on a dollar basis. And it's probably because the brand is more defensible for a lot of reasons that we'll discuss today. Now, I will say, just based on my research, I think it is the number one ultra premium luxury brand in the world. And based on its pricing power, like I mentioned the Birkin bag, so you can buy a brand new one. You won't get it. You cannot walk in the store and just get a Birkin bag. But let's say you got one for $8,500. You could immediately go to secondary market and get 3-4 times that price. So Hermes is probably leaving some money on the table by pricing it the way it does, but it understands, right? It's managing supply and managing the desire and demand of its customer base, like to perfection, as we will discuss. And so I want to work through all those things, and I'll say, oh, here's the thing. What is the source of today's episode? The main source is a book called The Luxury Strategy. It's a business professor named Jean-Noel Capferrer. And the other main source is this, I'm holding it up for the listeners, holding a book called The Little Book of Hermes by Karen Homer, a fashion journalist. Now, at this point, if I've said Hermes wrong, apologies. I did some Googling. I used to call it Hermes. Definitely not right. I'm going to stick with Hermes. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure I'll hear it from the audience. I mean, you've been yelling at me to do this episode, or an episode about luxury anyways. So let me give a quick summary or outline of where we're going to go through from here. I want to talk about kind of 3 main things. Is a brief history of the luxury. What is luxury, right? And that will become from the Luxury Strategy book. And then I'm going to talk about the brief history of Hermes, because from the top I mentioned craftsmanship, heritage, and time, like the power of time, something that lasts a long time, something that builds a long history, why that's important. And you'll see that with Hermes. And then I'm going to talk specifically about the creation of the Birkin bag. If we can all agree that is the height of luxury in the 2024 world, or 2023, I'm recording at the end of 2023 here, it is the height of luxury, we need to understand why. And then, of course, we're hitting the awards section. So let's get into it with the history of luxury. Okay, so there's a passage here from the Luxury Strategy. It says, since the dawn of humanity, there have been organized societies, leading groups, and of course objects, symbols, and lifestyles specific to the leading groups. It is in the appearance of these leading groups and the symbols and objects specific to them that we need to look for the origins of luxury. If we accept this analysis, luxury is part and parcel of humanity and of life in society. So the example that Jean-Noel Capferrer uses, or one of them, is Egypt. I want you to think about ancient Egypt. How is that in your mind? What is a popular image of ancient Egypt? You obviously have the pharaoh, dressed up in that wild gold, lots of servants, pyramids built for him. And the idea here being the pharaoh is at the top of society. Clearly, ancient Egypt was a stratified society with a clear hierarchy. Now, this luxury that was given to the pharaoh during his life goes to the total next level when he dies, right? So he's buried with his servants. He's buried with live animals. He's buried with all of his treasures. So we've had treasure hunters for thousands of years trying to find these famous Egyptian tombs. And essentially, the reason this is brought up in the book is just we have had hierarchies for thousands of years. Now, you can apply this to ancient China. You can you go to the Americas, you obviously have the Aztecs, the Mayans. They all have very stratified societies. People at the top own the wealth, the treasures, the servants, the slaves. You go to Europe, it's the same situation, right? The kingdoms that grew in Europe out of the Roman Empire, stratified societies. Everywhere we go over all times, there's been stratification. Now, the point of bringing that up is history at the point of the Industrial Revolution and the 1700s, the Enlightenment, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, is you're seeing a shifting of societies away from these thousands of years built social stratifications and hierarchies and much more focus on the individual. And this is almost not coincidentally where the most famous European luxury brands all come from. I'm going to list off some of the most famous names. Many are in the portfolio of Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, LVMH, the luxury conglomerate. Others are just well-known brands, but they all rise up in the 1700s and the 1800s. And there's a reason. It's because that social stratification society system that I just described to you, it gets broken to pieces with the Industrial Revolution and Enlightenment and democratic revolutions, Republican revolutions in the 1700s and the 1800s. Okay, so I'll give you a couple of the brands. Hennessy, 1765. Guerlain, 1828. Loewe, 1846. Louis Vuitton, 1854. Tag Heuer, 1860. Berluti, 1895. Bulgari, 1884. Brugier, 1775. Hermes, 1837. Why did all these brands crop up in this time period? Because the old nature of social stratification completely changed. And I'm about to read you a couple of passages from the luxury strategy to explain the Industrial Revolution, what those changes were. Since the dawn of humanity right up to the turn of the 19th century, the world of luxury has been virtually totally isolated from the rest of the economy. Its pleasures and delights reserved for a very small elite. Practically the entire population were living in a subsistence economy, firmly rooted in their rural environment, living life of misery in towns and cities without any access to culture. Then the Industrial Revolution hits, right? 1800s. So here we go. This is where things really change. Here, the passage continues. Following the Industrial Revolution, which brought about a considerable rise in living standards, more and more individuals found themselves with the financial means to afford luxuries. End of social structures precipitated the growth of luxury. We'll say that again. The end of old social structures precipitated the growth of luxury. Originally, luxury was the visible result, deliberately conspicuous and ostentatious, of hereditary social stratifications. So that would be Egypt, ancient China, Mayan, Aztecs, the kings, priests, nobilities that I just discussed. But 18th century rational thought and Enlightenment philosophy resulted in the gradual disappearance of the founding myths of European society that gave legitimacy to the social structure, whether in the Middle Ages or under the ancient regime in France. So the point is, all of those old structures, and in France, right, it was a sun god, like Louis XIV was known as a sun god. He was basically tied to the hip with the Catholic Church. That's where the power came from. That's where legitimacy came from. That's why he was at the top of the hierarchy. But when these social structures were destroyed, the old way was destroyed. Something had to fill the vacuum. That's where these luxury brands come from. That's why they all grew from this period. So, another passage from the luxury strategy. Luxury then has a fundamental function of recreating the social stratification. I'll say it again. Luxury then has a fundamental function of recreating social stratification. Whether we like it or not, that's just what it is. Humanity, for thousands of years, as demonstrated, just going back to the Egyptians, probably go back way further for the existence of hierarchies. Now, an important thing to note here about Hermes and the luxury industry in general is some of the brands that do last, the brands that we know well today, their connection to royalty helped them fill that vacuum. It gave them legitimacy. Hermes started because that leather making was used by Napoleon III. Rolls-Royce famously was a car for the royal family in England, which is why today it is still the peak luxury for vehicles. And then you have the other thing that with Hermes that we'll discuss is they have the famous Kelly bag, which is on par with the Birkin bag in terms of fame. And that kind of got its momentum when Grace Kelly, at the time, the Princess of Monaco, so royalty, became associated with the bag, hence the Kelly bag. So just to reiterate, like luxury grew up and came up at a time when the old social structures was destroyed. So something had to be there for people to understand where they were in society. And the brands were a way of signaling. So a couple more passages from the book, which I think were very relevant. Clearly, luxury is a marker, which is why there is such a need for brands. With luxury recreating some degree of social stratification, people in a democracy are therefore free within the limits of their financial means to use any of its components to define themselves socially as they wish. So from the 1800s and then specifically 1900s, just two big things that happened. It was the feminist movement, women got way more rights, and mass globalization. So this access that was described in Europe, we're talking about the Industrial Revolution when more people were moving out of subsistence lives and actually had wealth. Now that's spreading to the entire world, and that has been for the past 2-3 decades, or 3-4 decades, say post-World War II. All that does is help the luxury industry. Because as more people enter this fray, the idea of luxury and how to separate yourself from other people, it just, the amount of people involved in that gets larger and larger. There's a ratio we'll discuss later, but one of the most important ratios in luxury is, and the numerator is the number of people that can the numerator would be the number of people that know about a luxury item or a luxury product. And then the denominator is the number of people that can actually afford or acquire. So you kind of want that number to be quite large. The larger that ratio, the more people know about something, but the less they can actually get it, that creates something in people's mind that is quote unquote luxury. And that is something that's highly sought after, highly desirable. And we'll discuss, it's not only about price. Price isn't the only thing. Like if Ford came out tomorrow with a $500,000 car, that would not make it more luxury than a Rolls Royce, which started about $300,000. You need things that we'll all discuss, like heritage. You need craftsmanship. You need history. So these are all important things which we will discuss. But before we do that, let me summarize why brands came in to fill that hierarchy vacuum. So Industrial Revolution, more people become wealthy. The old social structures were destroyed in the French Revolution, for example. Ancient regime was destroyed, and the royalty and the kings lost their power. And then you see the Republican movements towards democracies in the 1800s and the 1900s. And all these elements are bringing more people into the fold and destroying the old way of hierarchy. Now, when we say that luxury fills this vacuum for signaling and social stratification, today's episode, and the Birkin bag specifically, is going to focus a lot on this element of time. Why is time so important? So I'm going to talk through some concepts about time and relate them to the Birkin bag, and we'll get an idea of why time is such an important variable if you want to make something luxury, right? So if you want to start the next Hermes today, it's not like a SaaS startup, right? I'm not just going to Stripe and then Stripe Atlas, starting a new business, getting a website through Wix, and like I'm ready to go. There's no history there. There's nothing established. There's no brand identity. There's no heritage, if you will. But this is why time is so important in luxury. It's because time is honestly the ultimate luxury, right? And I'm about to list off a number of ways where you'll see with the Birkin bag the importance of time. So number one, heritage and its geography and where it's rooted, right? Luxury items have to be in one place. They have to have a continuous history from one place. This is an extremely important concept. So if you took Hermes out of France where it's manufactured, it would no longer be valuable, or it would no longer be ultra luxury. It would still be valuable, but it would lose that link to its history. And that history is very difficult. You can't recreate that, right? that almost 200-year history cannot, by definition, cannot be recreated by a brand new brand that came out today. So even if a brand new brand started today, in 200 years, Hermes will have 200 years on it. It will have a 200-year lead, right? That's the idea of time creating something that's scarce, which contributes to this luxury element. Now think about craftsmanship. Craftsmanship is also about time. It takes about 20 hours to make a single Birkin bag, and one person does it. It's not a mass manufactured product like there aren't these factories in Vietnam that can just crank them out 1,000 an hour, because time, the effort put into it, is another component of luxury. Durability is a different idea that's related, but it's also about time. How long can an item last? An Hermes bag, a Birkin bag. Remember I mentioned the resale value, 3 to 4 times off the bat. It's because it's also that craftsmanship means it will last a long time. The best inputs, the best leather, the best metals means it will last a long time. It's not mass produced. Mass production by definition will not have the same shelf life. A Vietnamese grocer always told me, you buy cheap, you buy twice. And you know, I'm as guilty as anyone. I go to Costco, snatch up all them Kirkland swag, them Kirkland jeans, them Kirkland gym shirts, but you buy cheap, you buy twice. I'm always back buying there. But if I just focused on quality, you wouldn't have to do that. So I started doing that more with Lululemon. Shout out to episode 3. You know, high craftsmanship on Lululemon relative to a lot of other athletic brands. So time, another element, connection to royalty. You keep that line. I mentioned Grace Kelly, Princess Kelly with the Kelly bag. I mentioned the royal family with the Rolls Royce. Those are built over time. That ties into mythology. Mythology doesn't happen overnight, right? Is the myths, the ones we go back to, they're from thousands of years ago, because this concept, which we discussed on the La Sagrada Familia episode, the Lindy concept, right? The TLDR of that concept is the longer something has existed, you can expect it to exist from that much longer. Take Shakespeare. Shakespeare has critical mindshare, 500 years since the creation of his works. We can expect that to last another 500 years. Whereas, let's say if I wrote an ebook tomorrow about faux recipes. First of all, it'd be a sick book, but the expectation that would last for 500 years is very low. It has not proven itself through time. So with time and Hermes, you're seeing how, because it has that lead from 1837, the value that it can accrue for its brand, the expectation that it will last, and why that makes it really contributes to being at the apex of the luxury game today. And a lot of the other brands I mentioned, the Louis Vuitton from the 1850s, Breguet, the watch, Napoleon, not Napoleon III, the original Napoleon wore that watch in 1795. So there's that Lindy effect to it. Now, another parallel, before we get into the story, specific story about Hermes that I want to talk about, is luxury relationship to and similarities to religion and the luxury industry. So the book, The Luxury Strategy, lists off 3 important parallels. So like any religion, a lot of symbols. So you go to any luxury brand, it will have a very famous symbol. So everyone here knows what the LVMH monogram looks like. I want you to picture the Hermes orange. I'm lifting it up right now for the viewers, but the listeners, you can picture it right now. Close your eyes. You'll see the Hermes orange. That's a symbol. Okay. So that's a very important element of luxury brands, which is similar to a lot of religions, which have their iconography and colors, which mean certain things. Now, another thing that's important is the idea of creator or uplifted individuals. Obviously, you take the Catholic Church, there's Jesus, Buddha is a significant figure, Muhammad for Islam, and the luxury industry also assigns the value of a creator with a brand. So Chanel had Karl Lagerfeld, very important relationship. What's interesting about Hermes actually is they care so much more about the product versus the branding side. I mean, they famously don't even have a marketing department. That's what Axel Dumas, the current CEO, says. But I just want to talk about the luxury industry in general. They do relate. I guess with Hermes, their brand is more related, not with the individual creators, but the Birkin bag is named after a British actress, Jane Birkin. The Kelly bag is named after Grace Kelly, also super famous American actress, later Princess of Monaco. So there's a connection between an individual and the brand or the larger organization. And then another important part in the luxury industry is the idea of sacrifice. And obviously, super important in religious traditions. But why is it important in luxury? For the things I mentioned about time. You're sacrificing time, you're sacrificing money, you're sacrificing your brain space to think about luxury. And the ones that can make you sacrifice the most kind of achieve the apex. And then we'll be reading and learning a lot more about how the Birkin bag does that. So we're going to jump in now to the history of Hermes. So the Hermes story begins in 1801. That's when Thierry Hermes was born to a French father and a German mother. He was actually born in a German town, but it was under the Napoleonic Empire. So the Industrial Revolution is taken off in England. It makes its way to Europe. And everything we talked about earlier about how it completely changed society, right? The French Revolution got rid of the monarchy, and then the Industrial Revolution made wealth more widespread through the 1800s. This is where Hermes comes up in. Now, Thierry Hermes finds his way to Normandy, France. In 1837, he had lost a lot of his family to disease and Napoleonic Wars. But in 1837, he specialized in saddles and opened a shop in Paris. So he was a craftsperson. And he was known for taking the most precise measurements for horses and riders. And he'd spend months making these hand-stitched saddles. And he was the best at this trade. And you remember how brands and individuals and craftspeople were kind of helping the top echelon of society separate themselves from the rest. Well, Napoleon III and his wife were consumers of Hermes's products. So with Thierry Hermes being the best saddle maker in Europe, he established himself as such. He was known for something called the saddle stitch. Hermes still uses it to this day on their leather products, namely the Birkin bag and the Kelly bag. What the saddle stitch was is you took two needles that were wax linen threads and using tensile opposition. Side note, I have no idea what that means, but I'm just telling you, I'm reading off the script here. Tensile opposition, but the unique method of stitching, what it does is basically if one part of the stitch breaks, it doesn't undo the rest, which is important for horse riding, right? And if you're selling to Napoleon III, you don't want this dude's saddle coming off the horse if there's too much pressure. So the point of this is Thierry Hermes was the best saddle maker in France and probably Europe at the time. Now, that's generation one. Generation two, his son, Charles Emile. Charles Emile, not a ton of information here about him, but he was also a saddle maker, expanded the customer base from royals in Europe to Asia and Russia. And he also, Charles Emile Hermes, which is the son of Thierry Hermes, he also established the Hermes flagship store in Paris on 24 Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honore. The embarrassing thing, people, I spent 10 years studying French in Canadian schools, and I can't pronounce a word. I lived in Montreal for 5 years. Granted, I only spoke English there because I lived in like a super Anglophone area and just partied way too hard. But the point is, I butchered that. Apologies. But Charles Emile, second generation, the headquarters for Hermes is still there. Now, we're going to the third generation, and this is where it gets kind of interesting. Timeline, remember what we talked about. 1800s, people getting richer through the Industrial Revolution, more democratization of riches, and the minimum living standards are increasing. And the old royals in Europe falling one by one, right? People are becoming, countries or pieces of land are becoming nation states. There's a move towards democracy. So there has to be ways for people to stratify themselves, show the hierarchy in society. The luxury brands are filling the void. So the interesting thing about Charles Emil's children, so he's got two boys, Adolf and Emil. Spoiler alert, this is the last Adolf named person in the Hermes family. But Adolf and Emil, they take over for their father. And the key here, there's two key developments. Both of them have to do with the automobile. So Emil Hermes went to Henry Ford's factory because at this point, Hermes' reputation as leather makers was top tier, even in the early 1900s. So, and they'd worked with Bugatti to outfit the inside of Bugatti vehicles, which is also one of the luxury vehicle brands in the world. And Emil Hermes goes to America, sees Henry Ford, visits the factory, and says, oh, wow, we can bring this factory mindset back to Europe, back to France for Hermes, but not to overdo it. They, even to this day, they only cap their craft shops to 250 to 300 people. I think Axel Dumas, the current CEO, says once you get above a 300, you lose the individualness of that building, of that shop. Like everyone kind of knows everyone, and there's that humanity. Once it gets too big, it loses that element. That's Axel Dumas's position. That's the current Hermes CEO. I think he got that from, it looks at the great-great-great-grandfather or great-uncle. So Emil goes back and is influenced to increase the production of Hermes, but not too much. So it's the number one influence from the auto industry. The second one's quite big. As automobiles rise up in the 1810s, 1820s, what happens to horses? The bread and butter of the Hermes business, the horse saddles, that's going the way of the doo-doo. So here's the story between Adolf and Emil Hermes. There's a split. So Adolf tells Emil, we have to sell the Hermes business. Our clients now have automobiles. Our business is dead. And then Emil told his brother, this is so gangster. I love this. He goes, Adolf, you're selling, I'm buying. So Emil bought out his brother Adolf from the Hermes business. And then immediately Emil goes to his craftspeople and artisans and asks, what can we do with your hands that will be relevant to our clients that don't have horses anymore but have cars? So he's asking his artisans. The artisans look around, they're like, okay, well, we can equip automobiles with luggage, handbags, and clothing, right? We can do those things now. Might not be the saddles are no longer the bread and butter, but we got that saddle stitch. What can we do with that tensile opposition? Let's make some leather goods. So they go into different leather goods. They start doing watches in 1920. They cut a partnership with Neiman Marcus in New York in 1930. So this is Emil Hermes. He's thinking of pivoting the business away from horses, and that's exactly what he's doing. 1937, 100 years after the start of the business, Hermes gets into silk scarves, which is, I'm probably going to have to do an episode on silk scarves because their silk scarves are next level. My wife, again, I mentioned at the top, she reminds me of the Birkin Bag. She also reminds me a lot about the silk scarves. It's like, you know, when your wife and you're just walking down a luxury street and then you see a window, she's like, oh, that's nice. And then she'll say, oh, that's nice. And in the back of your head, she's like, oh, I'm getting set up. I'm getting set up for this one. So Hermes, you got me on those silk scarves. Let me say that. So Emil Hermes, the main thing I'd say is he took the business away from the horses. He was the third generation. And the last thing with him that's quite important is he took, again, I'm holding this up for the listeners who are not seeing it. I'm holding up the book from Karen Homer, but the book is in a special orange, the Hermes orange. This belongs to Hermes, this color. Like you can't even find it in like the Pantone registry of colors, but this is an accident, like this color. So it came out in 1942. And what happened was that Hermes used to have cardboard boxes that were grainy and it kind of mimicked pig skin, but there's a shortage of that material during World War II, understandably. And they pivoted to what was available, and it turned out to be this iconic orange, which is kind of amazing. So we'll move to fourth generation. Now we're entering the Dumas family. So if you're wondering, hey, Trung, why is it Dumas family? It doesn't sound like Hermes. It's because Emil Hermes had 4 daughters. He did not have a son, but he did have a son-in-law, and that individual was Robert Dumas. And that's why the the Hermes Dumas family is known as the Hermes Dumas family. Now, Robert Dumas, his claim to fame was the Kelly bag. So the Hermes empire has started making bags in the 1930s, but the Kelly bag was an adapted version of an existing bag they had, and it became really famous because of a Life photo. So Life magazine at the time, the number one media property, or one of the number one media properties, the number one print media property other than Time magazine in the United States. But there's a photo of super famous actress Grace Kelly. She had married the Prince of Monaco. She was now the Princess of Monaco. She was trying to hide a baby bump, and she did it with an Hermes bag, and that became the Kelly bag. And Kelly bag is like 1A, 1B with Birkin nowadays. So that was the claim to fame from Robert Dumas. Now we're going to go to the most important person, in my opinion, outside of Thierry Hermes, the most important person in the Hermes story, specifically for sure the Birkin story, is Jean-Louis Dumas. Because Jean-Louis Dumas is the one that made the Birkin bag, the entire point of this episode. And he was CEO of Birkin for 3 decades, from 1978 to 2008. From the time he took over to the time he left, I think the revenues from Hermes went from 100 million to 2 billion. So 20x the revenue. More importantly, he took Hermes super global. And we're going to talk a bit more about Japan, but you remember how rich the Japanese became from basically 1960 to 1990. The Japanese miracle. There's a point when the land underneath the Emperor's Palace was worth more than the state of California. That was a Japanese real estate bubble. But Japan, extremely important in the story of luxury. We're going to touch on it towards the end here. But the point I'm trying to say with this segment was that Jean-Louis was a CEO that expanded Birkin. And something I want to say about this entire through line is you have to remember, luxury, there can only be one of the best in ultra luxury. So this is the battle that's been going on. This is the meta battle that I haven't even specifically spoken about. So from 1837, from when they started, to now, I've taken the story to the 1970s, people and brands are battling out. You have the Chanels of the world. You have the LVMHs, or the LVs of the world. They're battling the Diors to be the best of the best, right? And even today, like my wife tells me that the 3 bags is LV, Chanel, and Hermes. That's like the big 3 in her mind. And Hermes is the top of that. But the importance of Japan is that market. We're talking about wealth, right? The richer that they got in a society that had always had a lot of social stratification. The samurai, the emperor. So luxury was a huge deal as a social signifier in Japan. And Jean-Louis Dumas took the luxury brand of Hermes there, and he took it to 300 stores worldwide. So this was his claim to fame. 3 decades as a CEO of Hermes. And then very importantly is he took Hermes public in 1993. And the reason he took it public is the Hermes Dumas family has a lot of heirs. I think at this point there's over 100 of them. Some of them were itchy. They wanted that exit liquidity, right? They wanted some of that cash money. Maybe they didn't just want to tie it up in Hermes. So in 1993, Hermes floated 4% of the company. Tiny float. 4% of the company went public, and they were able to get some of these. I'm sure some of these ancestors were itching, and they're just like, "Hey man, do you think we can get some of that cheddar? Like, it's great that we got all this private equity or this equity in this private company, but I'd love to get a little bit something." And that's what happened in 1993. But that would lead to, I'm going to tease it out, Louis Vuitton, LVMH, Bernard Arnault, which is today the second richest person in the world. He tried to make a move on Hermes, and it didn't work out. It's a great story, and we will talk about that. But it started from, that all came about because in 1993, Jean-Louis wanted to get some extra liquidity for some family members that are probably bugging him a lot, so they took it public. And they also got an infusion of cash to help with expansions. The other key point, other than the Birkin bag, was that his wife, Renee Dumas, of the 300 plus stores that I mentioned that Hermes has around the world, they own, and they work with franchisees in some of them, but they're bringing a lot of them back in-house. They want to own the full stack. You know, I haven't talked about it yet, but like they own like crocodile farms, right? It's like vertical integration for all the products. So Rene Dumas, Jean-Louis Dumas's wife, she was she's a designer architect, very celebrated. She helped design many of these stores, including the flagship or redoing the flagship. And then we'll get to the Birkin bag mythology. That happened in 1981. I'm not going to touch on that yet. I'll finish off the 6th generation. Quick note of where we are now. I've talked about Axel Dumas. He is Jean-Louis' nephew, and he joined Hermes in 2003 and became CEO in 2014. He's kind of like the more analytical guy, Harvard dude. He went to French Polytechnic, which is like the France MIT. His cousin, Pierre Alexis, is the creative director, and Pierre Alexis is the son of Jean-Louis Dumas, the founder or the creator of the Birkin bag. So we're going to switch gears quickly to now talk about the Birkin bag story, now that I've walked through the 6 generations of the Hermes Dumas family. All right, so we're going to get into the Birkin bag story now. And this is on the heels of A Brief History of Luxury, a brief history of the Hermes Dumas family. And the way I want to start this section is by going through a chapter from the book, The Luxury Strategy. It's called The Anti-Laws of Marketing. So luxury, especially ultra high-end luxury, it's just so different from anything else. And you'll see it with this Birkin bag. Like the Birkin bag like flips the commerce story on its head. Let's give you an example. To get a Birkin bag, you can't just walk in a store and get one. You basically have to wait for the store to tell you can buy. I want you to think about that. Imagine a business. Imagine you go to the corner store or 7-Eleven, and then you walk in there and you want a Slurpee. You have to wait for the cashier to tell you to buy the Slurpee. It doesn't make any sense, right? But the Birkin bag is completely different because it's ultra premium luxury. It's ultra high-end luxury. They just do things differently. I'm going to list off to you a couple of these high-end big ideas from the book, The Luxury Strategy. These are the anti-laws of marketing. Forget about positioning. Luxury is not comparative. You don't want to compare anything for ultra luxury brand because you're not going to talk about like features, right? Nobody's buying a Birkin bag because it has X amount of pockets or that the shoulder strap fits just right. That's not the point of it. You're not comparing these features with other bags. That's not why people are getting a Birkin bag. The other big idea is do not pander to your customers' wishes. Okay. And a related one, which is kind of funny, is dominate the client. This is a great one. Keep non-enthusiasts out. Another rule, anti-law, do not respond to rising demand. And then I'll make it, the last one I'll mention here is make it difficult for the client to buy. So there's a terminology that Axel Dumas, the current CEO, says. He says his job, or one of his jobs, is to create desire, right? Not necessarily to fulfill desire, is to create the desire. And remember the ratio that I told you about, the luxury ratio, is the amount of people that know about a product or a certain lifestyle or a certain aesthetic versus the amount of people that can actually get it. You want that number to be large because at the end of the day, luxury is embedded with social stratification. And social stratification only works is if it is known. It has to be known by enough people, but those people can't all get it. So we're going to talk about the Birkin bag. Now, let me give you one more quote from Axel Dumas. He says, one area of sophistication with Hermes is that we don't have a marketing department. We don't do commercial studies. We don't ask people what they want or look at or what the other people do. You don't need to have marketing. You need to be true to your style. We are Hermes and we create desire for our clients. It's like Steve Jobs said with Apple. He said, if they had asked Henry Ford what people wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So when it comes to these things, and I mentioned Apple previously, we did the first episode. Apple obviously is a luxury brand for hardware electronics, right? It's the best of the best. And it's not really asking. I mean, Steve Jobs famously says, I don't ask. Like, I'm not going out there and asking the customers what they want. It's like they're trying to understand the best. They're craftsmen. That's their identity. And this is kind of what this Birkin quote is saying, or this Hermes quote is saying. So the things about the Birkin bag that I want to talk about and trying to string through a couple ideas that we've discussed up to this point is there's a long heritage, right? Obviously, why is Birkin the top of the top? Well, we discussed how important time is, and then Hermes goes back to 1837. And just give me an idea, LVMH, they own over 10 brands that are over 100 years old, right? So Bernardo Arnault, the second richest guy in the world, he knows the value of heritage. And then that's what gives Hermes a leg up in the battle against anyone else. It goes back a long time. It goes back to Napoleon III. It has that heritage, right? The other thing that we discussed earlier was this idea of mythology. Hermes, the Birkin bag specifically, has a mythology to it. We discussed the Kelly bag mythology with Grace Kelly, the actress, holding the bag in front of her baby bump for Life magazine. So here is the famous Birkin bag origin story. So it began in 1981 with Jean-Louis Dumas, CEO of Hermes, is on a flight between Paris and London. He's sitting next to Jane Birkin, very famous actress at the time. She goes up to put her bag at the time. She's carrying like this wicket basket, and she's got our clothes in it, her books, her notepads. She pulls it out from, I guess they're probably sitting in first class, but she takes it out from the upper compartment, falls on the ground, everything falls out. Jean-Louis Dumas goes, you should get a Hermes bag. And then Jane Birkin says, if you have one with pockets, the day that Hermes has one with the right pockets, I will buy it. And then Jean-Louis Dumas, I love this line, he goes, I am Hermes, I'll make it for you. And then he goes back, spends 3 years making a bag for Jane Birkin. Again, this is the mythology of the founding story. And there's been some questions as to how true this anecdote is. They definitely were on the flight together, but I'm sure some of it gets embellished. But the whole point is there's a founding story, right? And it's a serendipitous one. You just cannot recreate that story out of thin air. I mean, you can try, but people might call BS, especially in today's super cynical world. And for Birkin, though, they have that. That's embedded. So that's already baked in. And I think a point that you can make to show how important that founding story is, there hasn't been another Hermes bag to supersede the Birkin. So that's actually one of the criticisms. If you ask people, it's like, how does Birkin keep its margins? How does Birkin keep its pricing power? How does Hermes do that? It's like they haven't been able to replicate it. It's like maybe that founding story was a one of one. And that works both ways. That's really good for Hermes too. It means it's harder for other people to duplicate it. So I'm going to keep working down what makes Birkin special. The rare craft work, right? So an important thing with Axel Dumas, when he says he creates desire, it's because he knows how to pull the levers on the supply side and the demand side. So the supply side, which is what most people will understand for pricing, Econ 101, right? Is like you reduce the supply and the price, if the demand, all things equal, stays the same or demand goes more or greater, the price will go up. But I don't want to get too stuck on that because this is kind of like Hermes is not very typical in the supply-demand dynamic. But the point I'm bringing is like looking at the supply, it takes 20 hours, 15 to 20 hours to make one Birkin bag, and it's done by a single person. That's obviously going to constrain the supply. And then today, Hermes has 2,500 artisans. They only train an extra 200 a year. Even as demand has gone up, they only train 200 a year. And each individual that goes to that program has to spend at least 2 years, up to 5, to become an artisan to make a Birkin or a Kelly. So this naturally limits the supply. Just to give you an idea of the numbers out there, Hermes does not say how many Birkin bags they make, even though they're publicly listed. They're just not saying that. And that's part of their secret. I've seen anywhere between 20 to 70,000 get made a year, and that in circulation anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million. I did some napkin math, like Coach, which is obviously not a luxury brand, but they sell millions of bags a year. So just keeping in mind that the amount of Birkins every year is between, I don't know, call it 30 to 50 or 50,000-ish. And then in total circulation, we might have today maybe 500,000 to 1 mil. So limited supply. So that is on the supply side. But here's the thing. Axel Dumas and Hermes know how to manage the demand side. How do they create that desire? How do they create that ratio or make that ratio so large where so many people want a Birkin bag, but they can't get it? Keep that ratio tight. How do they do that? There's so many levers they pull. So the first one they pull is with the stores themselves. So there's 300 plus Hermes stores. And these stores have no idea how many Birkins are in circulation. They have no idea when they're going to get the Birkins. So I remember a couple years ago, I was trying to buy a Rolex. Not for myself. Just listen to the story, people. It wasn't for me. But I was trying to buy a Rolex. I went to the store. And the person selling the Rolex says, I have no idea when this watch will be here. You just have to come back the next day. I thought that they were effing with me. I thought that they were screwing with me. But they legit did not know. Like, for months, I was trying to go back to the store and communicate with them. They just had no idea. And then finally one day they called me. He's like, hey, it's available. And I thought it was complete BS, but then I saw how Hermes manages their stores. So their 300 plus stores, the managers of those stores twice a year go to Paris for an event called the Podium. At this event, at Hermes headquarters, the owners of these stores, the managers of these stores, they pick and choose items that they can have in their stores. So each store is different, which kind of contributes to this desire for customers because there's a bit of a treasure hunt. You go around the world to all these stores. And the trade-off basically is like, okay, I know Axel Dumas is saying, I know every store wants a Birkin. Or every store wants X amount of Kelly. Okay, sure, you can do that. But you also have to pick from the rest of our lines. We have ready-to-wear, we have scarves, we have wallets, we have accessories. You have to pick X amount from every vertical before I guarantee you bags. So he's creating demand at the store level. So these stores are fighting over the inventory. So now the psychology is in the stores themselves. What do you think they're doing to the customers? So I mentioned at the top of this segment that you can't even walk into an Hermes store and just get a bag, a Birkin bag. Like if you go and go try it today, they'll laugh at you. Like they might not laugh at you, but like inside they're laughing at you. You go inside and they'll just be coy about it. It's like, sorry, there's no bags available. Hey, you might want these sandals. You might want these $2,000 sandals, or maybe this wallet. And the idea is that if you ask for a Birkin bag, they'll tell you that none are available. They don't have any in the back, but they'll put you on some unofficial list, and they'll get back to you. And that's them flipping the buying model on its head. It's just like we talked about the anti-laws of marketing. They're dominating the client. You are no longer telling them that you want to buy a Birkin bag. No. They're going to tell you when you can buy the Birkin bag. Think about that. It's a complete 180. And of course, that's going to create desire. Anybody that's been in the dating game knows if somebody tells you no, you only want it more. Or anyone that has a child, you tell a kid not to do something, they only want it more. This is human psychology. But only luxury, only the best of the best can really pull this off. Now, I mean, there's a whole Sex and the City episode, an iconic one based on this. There's been like best-selling nonfiction books written about people trying to get Birkin bags. And then this is the next level that Hermes stores does for the Birkin bag. Okay, they're not going to let you just get it, and they're going to tell you when you can get it, but you know how you even get in their good graces? It's very well known. You need to develop a relationship with them, and that means buying the entry-level item. You get a belt, you get a wallet, you get a scarf. Now you're in their system. So they've literally become, it's like a recurring revenue business. Maybe that's why Hermes has software margins, because it's a recurring revenue business. You have to make that first purchase and work your way up the ladder. And that's how they've set it up. And people are willing to accept this for everything we've discussed, because Hermes has cultivated the best of the best idea of themselves. Now, the other part that I'll add is Hermes says that they don't do marketing. Hermes says that they don't, they say this, and there isn't any advertising campaigns with very successful celebrities. Like Louis Vuitton will do huge celebrity campaigns. For the World Cup, they had Ronaldo and Messi. That was their big World Cup campaign, playing chess on Louis Vuitton luggage. Hermes does not do that. But the different ways, and this is known as shadow marketing, is everything I just described to you. The limited supply, the way that they manage the demand of the customers, like basically tell them to like wait or kick rocks, right? That makes everyone want this product. Celebrities, they say don't get preferential treatment, but celebrities always find their ways to get it, right? J-Lo has it, Victoria Beckham has it, Money Mayweather has it, Cardi B has it. And the beauty is that when these celebrities, if they truly are working like everyone else to try to get these items, when they finally do get it, they're flexing them on social to their millions of followers, their tens of millions of followers. And that's where you get that luxury ratio. The amount of people that know about these items but cannot get it, right? These celebrities are doing it for Hermes. I don't know how planned it is, but that's what's happening. And an important concept here, and a lot of the reason why Hermes has 60% of LVMH's market cap at 1/6 of its revenue is because there's something called the Birkin halo effect. It's like the Birkin bag is the apex of luxury. You can't get it. You're working your way into it. But you will be happily buying the $1,000 scarf, the $3,000 wallet to get into that game and to get some of that brand halo. Now, the last thing I'll say about the Birkin effect here is that even though Hermes doesn't officially have a marketing department, Axel Dumas says every single employee has to learn about marketing. And the way they do that is in a 3-day training program. Any new employee goes to something called Inside the Orange Box. Somebody described it as indoctrination. But one of the key case studies is the Birkin. And they're probably teaching them the anti-laws of the Birkin. It's like everything you think in commerce. You know, people are battening down the doors to get this thing. We should increase production. It's like, no, we're not increasing production. The reason they're demanding it the way they are is because it takes so long for one to get made, is because we can only make so many. The reason why the store managers are communicating to their customers that they can't promise anything is because we're not promising the store managers anything. Our own stores, we're not promising them anything. This is like multiple levels of creating desire. And I think it's an extremely important concept. And at the very beginning of this episode, I think this is the most powerful brand in the world. I think this is why everything I just described, the amount of discipline that's involved to not just crank out demand, to keep it in these small artisan shops is immense. So that is the Birkin story. We're going to be talking a lot more about Birkin in the awards section. And I know I'm hearing from everyone, you love the awards sections, except for a couple of messages I got where they say they didn't love it as much as the rest of the episodes. But I'm hearing a lot. You guys like the awards section? So we're about to knock out a very good awards section. All right, we're doing the Birkin Bag Hermes Awards section for the listeners that have not listened to the other episodes. First of all, please listen to the other episodes after this one. Throw me them fresh 5-star reviews or 1 star. Just throw a comment. Actually, don't do the 1 star. Hit me with a 2 star. 2 stars are more honest. But here's the awards section. I'm borrowing it from the Rewatchables, the Ringers podcast with Bill Simmons, the film one. They just give out awards at the end of every movie they do. So I borrowed a couple of their awards, added a couple of my own. And the first award I always give out is for Apex Mountain. What from this story, the Hermes story, the idea of bringing luxury to life, the idea of bringing the most luxurious item to life, the Birkin bag, the apex of the luxury industry. What is the apex, the top part of this story? Craftsmanship. It has to be craftsmanship. I mentioned Apple. Let me give a quote from Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs learned this from his adopted father, who's a carpenter. And this is what Steve Jobs loves to say about craftsmanship. He says, this is what they do at Apple. When you're a carpenter making a beautiful chest of drawers, you're not going to use a piece of plywood on the back, even though it faces the wall and nobody will ever see it. You'll know it's there, so you're going to use a beautiful piece of wood on the back. For you to sleep well at night, the aesthetic, the quality has to be carried all the way through. The reason I'm telling you this Steve Jobs quote/anecdote is because it mirrors what Axel Dumas said about the gold on the bags with the gold prices at the very beginning of this podcast. It's the same idea. You, the creator, you, the craftsman, will know. And this is how Hermes approaches all of their products across their products line. I haven't talked about the revenue split, but 50% is leather products. Think about the bags. 23% is a ready-to-wear and the remainder is like silk, homeware. They have a perfume business. But the point is, craftsmanship is the peak. Famously, one Birkin bag once sold for $500,000 as a diamond-encrusted Himalayan Kelly. I think it's the most expensive Hermes ever sold. But that's just like the culmination of this craftsmanship. Now, where does the craftsmanship come from? So I've read from various sources. I think it might have been mentioned in the Low Book of Hermes, but an important note about Thierry Hermes, the founder of the Hermes Empire, or the first business, is that he was born in Germany. And they are of Protestant stock. France was primarily Catholic in the 1800s, as much as the church still did have power. But Protestantism, for people that don't know, specifically a sect called Calvinism, they're very closely related to the rise of capitalism. And Max Weber, the sociologist, the famous sociologist, has a book called The Protestant Ethic. And basically what it says in the book was that Calvinists believed in something called predestination. And the idea is that God had already selected who was going to heaven. And the way you actually knew that you were one of these people that were chosen and were predestined for heaven was to express yourselves through hard work and commercial success, or hard work and whatever you chose as your profession. Whoever was the hardest working and the most successful basically were showing that they're predestined and chosen. Whatever you believe about that, that was what the belief was amongst this segment of Protestantism. And I think that's a very important idea with the craftsmanship of Hermes, or at least in the early days. Now, Jean-Louis Dumas, who I've noted as the most, in my eyes, the second most important person in the Hermes story, he said, we don't have a policy of image, we have a policy of product. And it's the amount of work that goes into each item. And that also doubles up as saying they don't have a marketing department. But let me read to you from Karen Homer's book, Low Book of Hermes, how a single Birkin bag is made over 20 hours. And you can find, I'll put it in the links, but you can find these videos. They're very interesting to watch, seeing the famous saddle stitch and how the leather bags are made. But I'll read to you how a single Birkin bag is made. To this day, Kelly and Birkin bags are handmade by high-skilled artisans. First, the tan leather, already graded to the highest quality, is closely examined to the tiniest flaws, which are carefully cut away. Symmetrical pieces are meticulously cut and laid out before being stitched, not ditched, they're stitched, using the Hermes trademark double saddle stitch. The stitching is done with the bag held in wooden clamps. The two-needle process, devised by founder Thierry Hermes, is remarkably strong and designed in such a way that in the unlikely scenario that one stitch becomes broken, the others are unaffected. Once stitched together, the seams are gently tapped out with a hammer to ensure they don't stand out too much from the body of the bag. The seam is then sanded and shaved to create a perfectly smooth finish. Finally, it is coated in beeswax with the dual purpose of waterproofing the bag and making it beautifully smooth to the touch. The handles, made out of 4 or 5 layers of compressed leather, are laboriously hand-shaped, and the artisan places it across the thigh to create the ideal shape. The final stage is attaching the hardware, which is not done with screws that can loosen over time, but with a more secure process invented by Hermes called purling. A clasp is placed on the front of the leather and a piece of metal at the back. A nail is then inserted from behind and clipped before being tapped with a special tool in a pearl shape, fastening the 2 pieces of metal together. Once the bag is finished, it is closely inspected for any defects before being sold. Bags that have flaws are destroyed. So, note, bags that have flaws are destroyed. I mean, great for the supply. A lot of people are pretty critical about that in terms of destruction and sustainability. But Hermes says they're trying their best to make their supply chain sustainable. What I'll say about that is that's just part of the ethic, right? It's like the reason they're able to run the business the way they are, provide these jobs, is they're holding things to the highest standard. And the creative director, Pierre Alexis Dumas, still to this day signs off on every product that comes out of the workshop. That just goes back to the limited supply idea, or the controlling of the supply, and the craftsmanship. And I mentioned a bit earlier that they vertically integrated their supply chain. Special farms for cow skin. They own crocodile farms. They get goats in Mongolia for cashmere scarves, and then they have farms in Brazil for their famous silk scarves. That's where they get the silk from, the silkworms. Now, the Apex Mountain, the last thing I'll add about the Apex Mountain is Axel Dumas has a great quote about how they hire artisans. And this just goes to the idea of craftsmanship. He goes, there's a German story about stone cutting during the Middle Ages. Someone asked 3 stonecutters what they're doing. One of the stonecutters says, I'm breaking rocks. The second stonecutter says, I'm earning my living. And the third one says, I'm building a cathedral. The third stonecutter is who Hermes hires. So, that sounds like a LinkedIn, like a Thought Boy tweet or post. But when it comes from Axel Dumas, I believe it. And just to rewind, for those that haven't heard it, check out episode 5 of La Sagrada Familia. Obviously, Anthony Gaudi's masterpiece. But the episode also involves a lot of a Japanese guy, Etsuro Soto, who very much, he went to Barcelona in his early 20s and was so blown away at La Sagrada Familia, he just decided to stay there. And he's the kind of guy that sees a stone and says, I'm building a cathedral. He's a type of stonecutter, literally is a stonecutter, that sees stone and says, I'm building a cathedral. So that is Apex Mountain. Okay, what aged badly? What aged badly from the Birkin Bag Story? Okay, so my finances will age badly when I finally get my wife a Birkin bag. So that's number 1. The other thing that aged badly is Hermes in China. Not Hermes's stores in China. They have, I think, 30 stores in China and quite successful there. But Hermes tried to launch a brand in China called Shangxia. Shangxia means above / below or up or down in Mandarin. And they launched it in 2010 with a Chinese designer named Zhang Qiang. And the thought behind it was similar. It's like the idea of heritage. And China has a very thousands-year-long craftsperson, artisan heritage. But they don't have any global brands in the 2020s, obviously. So Hermes tried to do that. Try to capture the rising Chinese economy with its own local brand. They sold out of it in 2020. They sold a majority stake to XR, which is a holding company that owns Ferrari. Might even be the Ferrari family, actually. But they sold $100 million. They sold this Shangxia business for $100 million, majority stake in it. So, I don't know, maybe 60, 70, 80% of it in 2020. They're still a minority partner. But I'm going to say that aged badly in the sense they tried to recreate the brand there and it didn't work. And the luxury strategy has a very interesting point about why luxury brands in China are maybe difficult to build or kind of disappeared. You remember during the Cultural Revolution, Mao Zedong, he did something he's called destroy the 4 olds. And the 4 olds were the old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits. Basically, the relationship to the past was cut off under the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s under Mao Zedong in China. So for luxury brands, for any luxury item to exist, it was kind of cut off at that point, which makes it much harder to build something of luxury. So I'd say that aged quote unquote badly. What's the funniest thing to happen in the Birkin Bag Story? This is not directly related to Birkin Bag, it's a more Hermes one, but I really like this line. It's from a Wall Street Journal article about Axel Dumas. He says, the article says, even now that Hermes has a multi-billion-dollar company, there is no corporate team dedicated to crunching data before store locations are chosen. Axel Dumas says, mostly it's done by intuition. We try to find a location on the sunny side of the street and a complicated building where there is a character. What I like about that, well, I think it's funny, is it's like basically picking on vibes. Just walking around like a metropolitan city in downtown area. He's letting the vibes fill him up. And if something's vibing with him, if a door handle is vibing with him or bricks vibing with him, he's like, I want that building. Okay, what's a notable prediction from the Birkin Bag Hermes episode? The most notable prediction was in the 1920s. It's from Emile Hermes. So Emile Hermes is the guy that visited Henry Ford. He's the guy that bought out his brother Adolf. Emile Hermes's wife in the 1920s said, hey, there aren't any good leather bags. Can Hermes just make it? That was a good call, good prediction, and the kind of the basis for this episode. Now, What is the biggest what if from the Hermes Birkin Bag episode? It is, and I teased it, it's when Louis Vuitton, LVMH, tried to acquire Hermes. You have to remember, Bernard Arnault is known as the wolf in cashmere. His reputation in Europe is as somebody that took the luxury industry and combined it with US private equity. So they've done huge acquisitions over the years. They started by buying a Christian Dior out of like a bankrupt conglomerate. Crazy corporate machinations to combine or to take over Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy. Recently bought Tiffany's for $17 billion. But here's what happened. So in the late 1990s, early 2000s, remember Hermes went public in 1993. So LVMH secretly started buying up whatever float was available. So we're about 25% of Hermes's equity is actually publicly available today. But you have to think about Bernard Arnault. He's secretly buying up a bunch of Hermes. Owns up to 20% by 2011. The way he's doing it secretly is you can go to bank. It's called an equity derivative swap. You basically make an agreement, a contract with the bank and say, I want an economic interest in a stock. So I will pay, you pay me if the stock goes up, I pay you if the stock goes down. But the bank's name is on the equity or the share, not the person enacting the contract. So they have the economic interest though. So Bernard Arnault is basically be able to build a 20% position in Hermes without his name on it. But then when it was revealed that his name was on it, Hermes lost its mind. Because Hermes this is the response. There is another CEO, the only non-family CEO of the Hermes brand. His name is Patrick Thomas. He says something pretty savage. He goes, when he found out that LVMH owned 17% of Hermes, he said he was revolted. And he would later go on to say, if you want to seduce a beautiful woman, referring to Hermes, you don't start by raping her from behind. I mean, Patrick, come on, bro. That's a pretty serious way of explaining, but that's how disgusted the Hermes family was with LVMH buying up such a large position. So it went to court. It turns out that LVMH was skirting some laws and around disclosures. But in the end, 2014, LVMH Hermes reached an agreement. LVMH would sell their about $10 billion position. It was up to 23%. They get rid of it. They're down to like single digits now. And they agreed that they would no longer try to do a hostile takeover. But Hermes, more importantly, the company, their antibodies kicked in. Now, if you remember in 1993 when they went public, a reason for going public was to give some extra liquidity to some of these heirs. So Axel Dumas got them all together and said, listen, we cannot let this company get taken over, especially not by LVMH, especially not by Bernard Arnault. So they created a new holding company. All the families got together. Before it was pretty split. The holding company is called H51. 51 refers to that they need to hold at least 51% of Hermes to make sure that there can be no hostile takeover. So they're up to about 70% now. But the point is that H51 is the holding company of all the family members of Hermes. They've agreed to put their equity in there and they won't sell for 20 years. So that's all the way to, at this point, I guess, 2034. Now, that takes me to my next award winner. The biggest winner from this story, I think, is the idea of family-run businesses. Family-run businesses have an awful reputation. The famous quote is from the shirt sleeve curse, right? It's like you go from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. It's the idea that family wealth can never last more than 3 generations. It just gets squandered by these inheritors. So you got to give respect to Hermes. There's 6 generations in. And part of this H51 holding company is that they're getting some fat distributions. $1 billion a year was given in 2022 for family dividends. So people getting paid. They're still getting some cheddar. And I think what's important with this family-run business is they consider themselves the keepers of the heritage. And now another piece, which came from a recent Bloomberg article, the H51 is a holding company, but also the family members, they have a family office called the Krefeld Invest Family Office. Krefeld is the name of the town, the German town, where Thierry Hermes, the founder, was born. So shout out, I'd say the biggest winner is the idea of family-run businesses. This is 6 generations in. And family-run businesses have a bad reputation, but this Hermes one, peak of the peak. Now, the biggest loser from this story, is the people that can't get the Birkins. So I'm going to shout out to all you that can't get the Birkin. And that's definitely, I'm in that bucket. Now, there's 3 things I'll say that I do want to know. Well, first of all, let me tell the story about this wait list. So Axel Dumas, or it might have been Pierre, the creative director, they basically were having dinner with CEO Jean-Louis in the 1990s. And the decision they made was that the Birkin bag demand was so high, the Jane Birkin legend was so high, that they're like, we need to increase demand. So at this dinner, it was either Axel Dumas, I'll say it was Axel, the current CEO. He basically said, why don't we just produce more, was the question I was asked. And he's like, no, we can't do that. Let's just let the stores decide what to do with the bags. And that's how this kind of like unofficial wait list was created. And Hermes says there is no unofficial wait list, but that's the legend, right? And that adds to it. That adds to the desire, creating desire. Now, there's 3 things I want to mention from a really good Economist article about why the way Hermes sells Birkins is so valuable. So typically in economics, when you want to create demand or raise the price, you limit the supply, right? Or if you want to gate people, you raise the price because there's only X amount of people that can buy at that price. That's called rationing by price. But the way Hermes rations, which I explained with Birkins, they ration by Q. It's like there's that line, right? And here's what makes that so smart. For the first reason, if demand drops, the sales won't necessarily drop because Hermes has created a buffer. So they're protecting themselves on sales by having this buffer of this backed up demand. The second thing is the surplus demand, which I've talked about, is the Birkin halo effect. There's so much demand for that Birkin. If they can't fill that, people will buy other items and creates that kind of recurring revenue idea. They're coming back for more. They'll buy the wallet, come back in a year or 2 for the Birkin. The third thing, and I'll read this quote directly from Economist, is that although market clearing prices might raise profitability in the short term, in the long run, they would drive French women away, leaving the new rich from the developing world as the bag's main buyers. So like, you don't want it just to be based on money. So the inputs in a Birkin bag are a few thousand. So call it 2,000. And they're listing at 8,000. They could list this thing to 40, 50,000 based on the secondary market. But you're going to drive away a lot of people. They're managing that customer base. And so I'd say, again, the biggest loser are people that can't get it. Next category for awards, the last one is, are there any substitutes? I said that the LV, Chanel, Birkin are kind of like the big 3 for bags. I don't think there's substitutes though. And as we mentioned, one of the anti-laws of marketing for fashion, for luxury, not fashion, for luxury, is that there is no comparison, right? It's one of one. And an example from the Economist article that I did mention was that there's a Belgian luxury house that's 8 years older than Hermes, started in 1829. It makes apparently really good handbags, the Tempet handbag. But the Tempet handbag costs 20% less than Kelly or Birkin. So there is no real comparison. But what I will say is I think at the apex, there is only one of one. There can only be one best ultra luxury brand. And right now, it's the Birkin bag from Hermes. All right, let's finish. What are the biggest lessons from this episode? For me, it's how, as Axel Dumas, the Hermes CEO, says, how they create desire. And they do it from the supply and the demand side. Prior to the Hermes story, from my mind, it was like, I always understood that gating products on the supply side, right? Hey, we only exclusive 100 of these, like Supreme drops. We have 100 of these. I understood that. I didn't understand how much you could do on the demand side, where you're flipping the model and you're making the customer, like the customer's not telling you that they get the bag. You're telling them they get the bag. So that to me is such a powerful idea of like ultra luxury, is the idea that you can flip it and you're in control. You're dominating your client. So I'd say that lesson largely is that there's both levers to pull, and no one does it better than Hermes, to pull the demand lever, to create the desire, and the supply lever, to make that luxury ratio, right? The amount of people that know about this item versus the amount of people that can get it. Time, I think, is going to be one for any of these ideas, the podcast ideas, bringing ideas, how ideas come to life. Time is the number one thing for any idea that's worthwhile that has come to life. And La Sagrada Familia is time-wise from the late 1800s, one that still, I think, my favorite episode so far to study, and because I visited it and it really stuck with me. And the line from that Gaudi says that my client, God, is in no rush. I'm not a religious person, but I get the instinct of what he's saying is like, you can't rush things. And Hermes kind of embodies that. And some related quotes I have around time, Jeff Bezos says, I ask everybody not to think in 2 to 3 year time frames, but to think in 5 to 7 year time frames. There's less competition in the 5 to 7 years. Imagine how long Hermes thinks, right? 9 years is how long they're thinking for the bag at the top of this story. Charlie Munger, rest in peace, famously said, making money is not in the buying, no, wealth is not in the buying or selling, it's in the waiting. It's about time. And then here's a related one, a quote that I really liked from Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money. He goes, effectively all Warren Buffett's financial success can be tied to the financial base that he built and that his skills in investing, but his secret is in time. He's been in the market for so long. And markets, investing, Hermes, of luxury items, not necessarily identical, but time seems to be a common theme here. Using it and trusting it and having the patience for it seems to be very important in these products and structures and ideas that have long-lasting impact. Long-lasting, right? The Lindy effect. The longer it's been there, the more likely it'll continue to be there. The last thing I'll say is from a quote, Axel Dumas, in a recent Bloomberg article. He said, we don't look too much at the competition because we might be influenced. And the key point here being is independence. Axel Dumas says, of the firm's core values, independence is number one. And this probably goes back to, the day of time. They're willing to let time be the decider. They're not asking the market for what it is. They're trusting their heritage and they're trusting in their craftsmanship as the North Star. And that comes with being independent and designing products the way they do it and the way 6 generations of the Hermes Dumas family has done it. So that is the Birkin Bag episode, people. Again, the 2 books is The Luxury Strategy and The Little Book of Hermes. Those will be in the notes. And, 8 episodes in, I cannot thank you enough. I've really been enjoying this. I love the feedback from all the listeners. Feel free to shoot me some 5-star reviews. If it hit 5, it hit 4 for you, hit me with that too. I'm not quite at the Birkin Bag level where everything's a 5, but I'm working on it. And I appreciate you all. Next episode is going to be a banger. Okay, thanks for listening to the awards. Let me just do a quick update for the Hermes story. A couple things of note that are worthwhile speaking about is, number one, Hermes is involved in an antitrust case. So about this time last year, some buyers in California went to the courts in California and said, hey, listen, we're going to Hermes. We can't get a Birkin bag. We're rolling up there. They're not giving us a Birkin bag. We got to get involved in this buying situation. We got to buy sandals, belts, all the stuff that we talked about, right? And in antitrust lingo, again, I'm not a lawyer, so not legal advice, but there's something called tying. And what tying means is that you are basically associating one purchase with another purchase. So in the context of the Hermes story, basically you get a Birkin if the sales associate convinces you to buy, like the belt first or the sandals first. They get you on the buying ladder, which is kind of like, software as a service. You keep buying just to get yourself one of these Birkin bags. Now, the courts have been skeptical of this case. There is one detail that I do find quite interesting in the allegation is that sales associates at Hermes are given a 1.5% to 3% commission if they sell the accessories. So that would be like the wristbands, the belts, probably the scarves, and I guess even the sandals. So you're kind of incentivizing the salespeople to sell those items. And you get 0% commission as a salesperson on the actual Birkin. Now, the interesting thing that happened here was the creative director, Pierre Alexis Dumas, went on 60 Minutes a couple months ago. So that would be December 2024 at this time. And he just had some banger quotes. His whole point is that Hermes does not do tying. It actually just masterfully controls his supply chain. That's the claim. But there's two quotes from the 60 Minutes that are worthwhile to this entire story that we have here. The first one is related to the difference between something being expensive and something being costly. And he says Hermes, specifically the Birkin bags, are costly but not expensive. So here's his quote. He says so this is Pierre Alexis Dumas, the creative director. He says, I've always heard that Hermes is very costly. And he basically agrees with that. And he goes, it's not expensive. It is costly. The cost is the actual price of making an object properly with the required level of attention so that you have an object of quality. Expensive is a product which is not delivering what it's supposed to deliver, but you paid quite a large amount of money for it, and then it betrays you. That's expensive. Look, man, that is just incredible massaging of words. My wife saw that quote, and now she just drops the costly versus expensive dichotomy on me nonstop. So, shout out to Pierre Alexis Dumas. I might necessarily not agree with this framing, but just from a marketing standpoint, really appreciate that. Now, the other thing they said in 60 Minutes is more related to how in this episode we've been talking about how Hermes sells time. Right? It's history, its relation to royalty, how the craftspeople spend 25 hours per bag, how it takes 2+ years to train them. Here's what he says when 60 Minutes asked him, why don't you just produce more and produce faster? This is Pierre Alexis Dumas's answer. Again, the creative director of Hermes, cousin of the CEO Axel. He says, well, speed is the structuring value of the 20th century. We went from horse carriages to the internet. Are we going to be so obsessed with speed and immediate satisfaction? Maybe not. Maybe there's another form of relation to the world which is linked to patience, to taking the time of making things right. You cannot compress time at one point without compromising on quality. So I think that really message with kind of the larger theme of this episode. So it was the first update I wanted to have. The second one was Jane Birkin, namesake of the Birkin bag, passed away. Rest in peace. And then the third thing, now that we're in April 2025, when I'm recording this, there's a trade war going on, tariff war. And an interesting thing is happening. At the top of this episode, I mentioned that Hermes has about 1/6 of the revenue of LVMH and is worth about 60% of its market cap. Well, fast forward now to a year and 5 months, and Hermes and Louis Vuitton have almost the exact same market cap. I think today it's 247 billion euros versus about 257 billion. So that's Hermes 247, LVMH 257. And the Hermes is still only 1/5 of the revenue of LVMH. And this is relevant because a big viral moment that's kind of come out of this trade war between particularly China and the United States is that there are a lot of manufacturers in China, a very, very viral TikToker, basically showing that in China they can quote unquote manufacture the equivalent of the Birkin bags for a fraction of the cost. But I would say, as this episode probably alludes to, Birkin bag, Hermes, that's a one of one. It doesn't matter if you can create 99% of the same quality. If you can have Chinese sewers and craftspeople make the exact same saddle stitch. The point for Hermes and why it's a one of one, why it's unmatched in the luxury game, the ultra high luxury game, is the story, the European royalty story, the founded in 1837 story, the 6 generations still running the company story, the Birkin bag story, right? The Kelly story. I think this really hammers home, and you see it reflected in the market because in 2025 year to date, so first 3 months of the year, LVMH is down almost 30%. Kering is down almost 40%. And whereas Hermes is basically flat, which based on if you've been following the market at all this year is quite impressive. And I think it speaks to the larger message of how Hermes has really crafted itself into this kind of one-of-one situation. It's above the clouds, if you will. Now, granted, it probably limits its larger market in the grand scheme of things, but I think an interesting note to have and why I wanted to round out this episode with those updates. Thank you again. Just going to leave with what I said before, man. Please share this if you learn anything. Love any reviews and subs, and see you next week, or not next week, next episode. Peace.